57 years ago today, Dr. Bob had his last drink. And Bill W. and Dr. Bob found out that what one could not do alone could be done together. And from that auspicious day, henceforward, millions of people who otherwise should be dead are alive and well. And it was because of the program they established with each other that grew worldwide proportions. And it's a wonderful program. The people who are part of it love it. It gave many of us back lives that would have been gone, but we have them today because of Dr. Bob and Bill. And tonight, we have with us Nell Wing. Now, Nell was personal assistant to Bill, and she was a longtime friend, close friend, of both Bill and Lois, who was the co-founder of Al-Anon. And it is Parkside Medical Services' pleasure, and especially my pleasure, because I had the pleasure of having dinner with this lady, of introducing you to Nell Wing.
Glenn, can you hear? I want to explain about the. I thought my voice would drown out everything anyway. Usually it does. I mean, people say, "Be quiet." Listen, one of the things I learned from Lois years ago, and have never forgotten, and that is when I take trips, when I do anything that's within especially the AA or my own family structure, I make scrapbooks. I take pictures and I make scrapbooks. I love to do that. And so what I did, this is a book, so I'll put it over on the piano. And if you'd like to look through it, it is the last 2 years of Lois's life, the parties, the things we did at Stepping Stones. And all, pardon me, my voice goes away. It just vagues at certain times. Pardon me. Also, there are pictures of Stepping Stones during various seasons. And at the end, there is the ceremonial, the burial ceremonial ceremony up at Connecticut, Vermont, beside Bill's grave, of course. And then there is the after the usual following January, the 12th night party that we always had. So if you want to see this, I'll put it over here. Also, it looks like there's just one, but you open up, it opens up. Each page opens up. Makes it twice. These are pictures of family, of friends at the various functions, and her cousin, her close cousin, Ann Smith, and all of us who've been around Lois for many years. So I'll put it over here. Okay. Oh, it's great to be here. Now, I'd like to take these glasses off, but I don't dare because I couldn't see you at all if I took them off now. This is a special day, no doubt about it, June the 10th. And I'm very happy to be here and share it with you. It's indeed a terrific pleasure. Also, I'm happy to be here and be just at this particular time, at this particular place with all of you. I've been going around and promoting the book an awful lot. But I'm very thrilled and grateful that all of you have brought copies and perhaps hopefully will enjoy it. The book is such a teensy-weensy little book, you know. I mean, just like I talk, I could go on here for hours and hours and talk. So it's just a small, at this point, story of what I could tell. Also, I wanted to tell you that, I was going to introduce myself as a non-Chinese, non-Indian wing. everybody used to say Bill's Chinese secretary. And not that I objected. I thought that'd be kind of fun to be Chinese or Indian. But it so happens I'm English and background, and the Wings come from the Cape and originally from England. And so I'm sure there's a lot of Wings all over this part of the country. But people always said, Nell, you don't look Chinese. And I said, I know, I'm not Chinese. This happened all the time. Also, I want to tell you that I was down in Texas a couple weeks ago and saw one of my most favorite people, Bob Smith. We're like a brother and sister. We have been for years, and I just adore him. We just adore each other. And down there, we spoke on a Friday and a Saturday night. Oh, thank you, dear. Thank you. Together. And I want to tell you that, in fact, I was talking to John Small today, and Bob and his sister Sue's book is coming out Friday, and it'll be available next week. So here's another book, and sooner or later we're going to have enough. But I have read the script of their book, and it's really very, very down to earth, very honest, very pragmatic, very much to the point, and I think you'll enjoy it. And it is called Children of the Healer, and the subtitle is the story of Dr. Bob's kids. That's the subtitle. So if this is just for your information, in fact, you'd like to follow it up or anything. Very briefly, and I better get to the point because we're going to be here all night. If I don't, that is to say I will be. You probably won't be. And tell you that it's been 53 years ago that I read in college in 1939 the article in Liberty Magazine called AA. What's it called? What is it called? What was it called?
Alcoholics and God?
No. Yeah, Alcoholics and God. Thank you. See, my mind is slipping down through the cracks. Memory is. And I was very, very thrilled with that book. And it was very strange that I would be, but my father was not only a teacher, he was a justice of the peace in our little community upstate New York. And he had many a time when the state police would come rapping on our door and waking my dad up and waking all of us up and dragging in the drunks, who many of them were my father's friends. And they had been caught drunk and driving, and maybe some accidents, and maybe sometimes you'd have to put them in jail overnight, or maybe for more than that, few nights. And so, after all, at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't have any money left, in your pocket to pay your fine or anything. So Dad would pay their fines. Okay, and hopefully they'd pay him back, I guess. But I knew then that the alcoholic was not what the Bowery bum, what we had been told by Prohibition, and what we say in New York. And I learned that one could become an alcoholic, whether you were a justice of the peace, whether you were a teacher, or whatever. And I knew that when I came to work for AA. And I think it made a lot of difference in my immediate perception of what I was, the people I was getting involved with and why. That made a lot of difference. Anyway, that was a terrific article, and I graduated in 1940, and I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible. Went down to Texas, taught school in a Mexican school, got a big case of ringworm, and decided I'd had enough of teaching, and came back north. Father died in 45. I had gone into service then in 44 into the SPARS, which was the ladies' department of the service of the Coast Guard. And SPARS means Semper Paratus. That's the motto, of course, of the Coast Guard. And it means always ready. And we took a lot of guff from the guys out in Seattle, And couldn't get rid of that at all. That stuck with us for the whole thing. Then I came back and I decided, now the 40s was a big wandering around period. It was war. We had the war very early on. And we were doing our own thing. I mean, especially the women. The women were doing men's jobs. We did what we wanted to do. To hell with everything else, you know. We did our own lives. We made our own lives. And so I decided that I would go down to Mexico to become a sculptress, because I had talent for sculpture and art, and I decided that would be a super thing to do. I had no very serious relationship going on at the moment. And so I decided I'd come down to New York, boy, when I think about it, and get a little extra money and be on my way, a temporary job, be on my way to Mexico. So I came down. My brother was going back to Harvard. I left him off at Albany. I came on down to New York, went to an agency. The gal came sat across from me, and read my resume. She said, just whispered, like the walls had ears, "How would you like to work at Alcoholics Anonymous?" And I said, "I'd love it." And I just blew her right off her chair. I think she expected me to say, "What's that?" You know? And I didn't. I said, "I'd love it." And so, because I had read the Saturday Evening Post article, I had read Time, Newsweek, two very good articles in the Reader's Digest, My Return from the Half World of Alcoholism, Maybe You Can Do It Too. And so I was really, except I didn't know the inward part of AA, I knew very much about what it was about. Wait a minute. And time to do this. Very good. So I went to the office on March the 3rd, 1947, and was greeted at the door, and on the 11th floor of 415 Lexington, right across from Grand Central Station in those days. Now it's a great, big, enormous, glitzy building. The whole block of it is called 425 Lexington. But I went in, and I was interviewed by Marion, who was the newly hired office manager. We talked. She was just out of the Navy, or the Waves, and I was just out of the Coast Guard, so we talked about our service days. I mean, we talked for a long time about that. And then finally, I think I said, "Well, look, Marion, what about the salary?" And she said, "Well, now look, Nell." She said, "We are a spiritual people here." And she said, "We perform spiritual help, give spiritual help." And so I said, "Yeah, okay." She said, "Maybe you could use some too." And I said, "Well, yeah, maybe so." And so when I got my first paycheck, believe me, I knew I wasn't going to get down to Mexico very soon. So I ended up there. My temporary job lasted 36 years. And I was glad of it, too. So that was how I came to AA. The next day, that was the first day. The next day, I went in, and Charlotte said, "I'd like you to meet Bill. Bill Wilson is down." I said, "Fine, great." Went in, tiny little room, and I don't think Bill didn't say hello or didn't shake my hand. You know, I expected at least to have him say, "Well, Nell, glad you're here. How did you find us?" And, you know, I mean, all the amenities. Not at all. He went over and sat down in the straight back chair, which I was to recognize for years later, leaning way back in it as if he would fall over backwards, and put his hands in his pocket, glasses on top of his head, and he started in bemoaning and sounding irritable, depressed about what was happening to him. And he talked about the trustees didn't want him to do anything, stay away from the groups, because Bill was going around all the 40s with Lois, and they were talking to the fellowship. Bill was trying to get across certain ideas and what he thought was necessary and needed for the fellowship. Nobody wanted to listen. And believe me, later when I started the archives, I knew exactly what he went through, because nobody wanted, they thought I was creating a monster. And I said, "Well, if I am, it's not doing very much traveling around here and coming up towards me or anything." But I hadn't the vaguest idea what he was talking about that second day in 47, and so I left as soon as I could. I didn't have any idea. And however, I was to learn later on, maybe within that year, what was going on in this era of the 40s that was supposed to be an era of unity, and most of the time it was an era of disunity. Not only in the office, I could take hours telling you some of the things that were going on in the office, because there was no leadership at the top. Nobody was there, say, to take Bill's place, because he was around, as I say, talking to the groups, trying to the members and all that sort of thing. And the fellowship at that time was, everybody was doing their own thing. The newsletters, there's a lot of newsletters going out from so many different areas, high and dry. Some of the newsletters are high and dry. Maybe the stew pot, the derelict schooner, the boomerang. Very funny names. And, of course, the grapevine we had in the office. And not only, there probably were about 35 or 50 newsletters finally during that whole period of the 50s being written, and each of the editors thought of themselves as founders. And they thought that they were the ones that had the essence, they had the opinions, they had the message to carry. And many of them, as well as some of the individual members who were starting groups and thought that Bill wasn't, who was he? Hey, Bill, you're just another drunk. And often they'd say, or two ways to treat Bill, either as a saint with a halo and, sitting, bowing, or as a person who, just one of the guys. He didn't, so what? He wasn't there. And so it was very difficult for Bill, not only trying to get his ideas across, but trying to get some perception, some idea of communication and a pure relationship with the members, which he never could really get. Bill's people that he could relate to that could help him in this whole business of leadership, which he wanted to get away from so much of the time. For years, right from the very beginning. There were people like Aldous Huxley, Gerald Heard, so many other non-professionals all over the place. Bill could relate to them and tell them his problems. They could give him outside help, and good help. But it didn't come from the members because they were either one side or the other. There was not a pure relation. He couldn't go to meetings like Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was faithful and had his same chair every night in the meeting. But Bill didn't do that. Bill was out doing so many other things. Bill, as Bob was, as Bill said, the Prince of 12 Steppers, which he really was. But you know something? So many people don't realize how many people Bill talked to on weekends. I started doing Bill's work in 1950, as you probably read in the book or whatever. And then I started going up to Bedford Hills every other week at least by 1954, because we were starting a writing project. We were going to do the big second edition of the big book. We were going to do a big history, brought up a whole lot of stuff from storage, all full of flies and moths. I got swamped with moths all the time, and finally got them all out. But Bill was too depressed, too much in the middle of depression to really tackle a book. So we had to let that go. What happened in its place was, as Bill, AA Comes of Age, based on the St. Louis 1955 convention. Also, Bill wanted desperately to do a final book as time went on, to be called, as he thought at that moment in time, to be called In All Our Affairs. He wanted to do a summing up a coming together of what he had learned and what the fellowship had learned, so that it could be of use and a final kind of overall view of AA by not only for the membership but for outside people who might have some use for it or might like to see what had been done. So there were many things that he had in his mind, but getting back to, if I may just for the moment finish what I was starting to say about the 40s problem, and as I say, there were the newsletters, there were a lot of movies, at least 6 major movies after The Lost Weekend came out, which was a major turning point in the fellowship about what an alcoholic was, who he was. And that then every major movie company wanted to do a movie of AA. I thought one by Paramount would be super because it was written by Robert Smith, and I just thought that would be very, very interesting. But nobody thought that except me. Nothing was done about it. So finally, by 49, they had stopped making paths to our door, whatnot. And there were a lot of books, and I'm sure you know all that. If I went into each one of these separately, would be here all day again. But the Common Sense of Drinking, there was one by Harold Mayne about the insanity of alcoholism and the DTs. And that always reminded me that when we were in the office one day, we were kind of like an intergroup, an early intergroup. You know, drunks came in, sat down, went to sleep, passed out, whatever. And I was a receptionist, so I saw it all happen. And one day, a guy came in, non-compos mentis, sat down, and finally, all of a sudden, he exploded. He said, "There's snakes under my chair." And he raced all around the reception room, and the gals in the back room made a big beeline for the elevators. And finally, one of the guys in the office, I've forgotten whether it was Bill or who was there, went out and said, no, there are no snakes under his chair. He's just got DTs. And brought them all back, and very sheepishly they went back to their desk and sat down. But things like that. One day, Abby Thatcher, I don't think I talked too much about Abby. I wish I had. There's so many things I wish I'd put in the book that just didn't get in. Abby came in very often, drunk and sober. I mean, one time sober and one time drunk. Couldn't be both at the same time. Obviously. When he was sober, such a great guy, intelligent, could talk. He knew all the wings upstate New York, and his family was from a very good family. His father, his uncle, I think, was a mayor of Albany, and he had other relatives that were in the government up there and that sort of thing. So he came from a very good family, and of course, as you know, he'd gone to school with Bill in Vermont. And but Abby would come in when he was drunk. Oh, he was feisty. Ugh. I just let him sleep. I just let him say his own thing because he was always battering Bill. Because Abby always thought, rightly so, I mean, I would too, that he ought to be co-founder, that he ought to have some recognition like that. But it didn't really. But Bill always called him his sponsor, and always happy to give Abby every and more recognition that he probably deserved, if you want to put it that way, except he deserved everything he got. But one day, it was very interesting, and it was an unlikely happening. Abby came in, one of the times he was drunk, and he'd go over and flop on the couch and pass out. And there he was, and then this guy came in the elevator. I don't know whether I put it in the book or not. Can't remember. Off the elevator, kind of dressed like a British businessman, bowler hat, umbrella, nice suit and whatnot. He came over and he said, "I'm writing a book," and he said, "I know pretty much what I want to say." And what I can put in about the co-founders, Bob and Bill. But he said, I'm lacking a lot of information about the fellow who brought Bill the message. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. it was one of those unlikely happenings. And I looked at him, and I'm ashamed to say, I pointed to Eddie. I wish I could take that back, but that's what I did do. But I quickly took him into Bobby Berger, and so he could talk to her. Isn't that a riot? Isn't that funny? So many things happened during those years, and one of the other incidences that happened maybe at least once a week, somebody would come in and want to copy the 12 steps. So I would say, fine, what group do you belong to? And they say, oh, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a member, but I want to use the steps in my own life. That happened at least once a week. It was amazing. And as years went by, I had cancer. For our recovery class, I always talked about, to everybody, talked about the 12 steps, one day at a time, et cetera, et cetera. And the nurses were wanting me to talk to the newcomers, the new ladies when they came in. And I did to some degree while I was still there. I had to be there a little extra longer than usual. But a few years ago, I thought I had a heart attack, or not a heart attack, but I thought I had something wrong with my heart. I went up to the Strand Clinic on 34th Street. A young lady doctor came in. She said, what do you do? She started writing notes. I said, I've been retired now for a long time. She said, well, what did you do? And of course, that's all you needed to ask me. And we're off to the races if you ask me that. And so we talked and talked. I said, what group do you belong to? She says, oh, no, I'm not a member. She says, I use the steps for my own benefit. I said, I understand that. And finally, we got talking until one of the nurses, an old lady, opened the door and said, when are you two going to get through in there? We need this room. And we hadn't even started talking about So I think it's amazing. And today, particularly, we don't have to say it's amazing. We know how many people use the steps. I used to tell Bill, I said, this is going to go all over the world, Bill. He said, yes, you can say it, I can't. And sure enough, it is over the world. Today, the AA is in 173 countries. There are over 2.5 million members worldwide. There are 96,000 groups, maybe more now. And the book is translated into at least 33 languages. Now, this stuns me, just absolutely stuns me. And not only that, but the recent translations, and there's one I can't think of, but it's Lithuanian, Turkish, Vietnamese, and there's another one around that same area. What? Oh, no, I don't know that one. That may be one of the other 32 or something. But no, this is in that same area. But anyway, can you imagine? Can you believe it? It's unbelievable. Our office, I just went up there a couple of days ago, and I felt, holy cow, this doesn't look like AA to me. I mean, I'm used to 3 tiny little rooms and 2 staff members, and I live in the past. And this was just stunned me completely when I looked down this long corridor, longer than the back of the room, and going that way, and then all around the archives, as big as this whole room to begin with, and boards up, you put pictures on all over the place. I mean, it's unbelievable, but that's what has happened. AA has grown. It's a miracle. It's a miracle it lasted, because I want to go back to the 30s. Now, I know I'm going all over the place here. But let me just tell you, besides all the other things that were going on, the activities, the lack of cohesion, the lack of management, as I say, Bill complained about that day that I talked to him about the trustees telling him not to go around the groups and getting them all excited, getting them all stirred up. He said they all they wanted me to do was stay in an ivory tower and write. Now, I'm going to just do this very rapidly because there isn't time to go into, I wish I could, I have to be some discipline here. But as I say, specific fears, specific dangers were abounding. if one let things go. Money was one of the big things. What to do about money? Can you? Does it need it? Everybody said no. AA doesn't need any money. Non-alcoholics are saying that. And to some degree, of course, the idea then was, what if they needed money and they were to grow and to expand? What were they, if they didn't ask for any money, what would they do then? In 1941, actually, the money, the contributions had started, I think it was $1 twice a year. And then a reserve fund later on, after we got a little cohesion to the office, started to grow. But the money, that was very little coming in, and that wasn't, I mean, a dollar twice a year per member, I mean, wasn't a heck of a lot. And also there was anxiety about the members not responding if we didn't, for the services that were needed, if we didn't have anything coming in. Bequests were being left by the late 40s and the early 50s. Non-members wanted to give us money. And if we had allowed that, not only did they want to give us money, they wanted to give us property. One guy was very rich down in Texas, and he wanted to give us a heck of a lot of land besides a heck of a lot of money. So there were things like that that kind of grew out of the principle about self-support. And that kind of thing that finally came together about what to do about money is what then made part of the traditions and the self-support thing. Members other than alcoholics, very early on, who can be a member? I remembered we all talked about that when I came to the office, when I was coming to the office. Drug addicts, members, sponsors were carrying drugs in their pockets to ease the pain of the alcoholic himself. That was an unusual thing to do, sponsor in order to keep quiet and keep everything, carried around in the pocket. So there was a lot of experience that had to be gained in not only in that period, but by even then, as Bill talks about it in 12 and 12, it had started, and whether a drug addict per se could become a member. And of course, Bill always said, and the whole idea is that it's okay and not unusual to have a drug problem if you've got an alcoholic problem. That's what makes you a member of AA. But if you don't have that, then okay, there's Narcotics Anonymous and some of the others. But this was very much of a thing in the 40s about who could be a member of AA. Marrying AA to other agencies. Oh, my Lord, that let off a whole explosion in the late 40s. Marty Mann had, it called it NCEA in those days, National Council for Education on Alcoholism. Now it's called NCA, of course. Marty had written a solicitation letter to agencies saying that, in her letter, if they gave a contribution, AA would benefit, would be a benefit of their contributions. Well, all hell broke loose all over the country of that. And that was one of the hardest problems to take care of, because agencies were starting to come rapidly, double headers, there was a lot happening in the late 40s. It was a stirring period. I came along at the office just when all of this was getting going and happening. So it was, I didn't realize that it was an exciting period necessarily at that time till much later. But this business of Marty and the solicitation letter, Bill and Bob had put their names on their letterhead, because Bill and Bob, especially Bill anyway, I guess Bob did too, were in favor of what Marty was doing and trying to do in getting help outside with the problem of alcoholism and whatnot. So they took their names off the letterhead, which of course helped one of the traditions when it came time to accept the traditions in the short form. Now in 1945, Earl T., the founder of AA in Chicago, had told Bill that he thought it was time to get started in solidifying what was happening into AA, what it was all about. And so that's where Bill started to write the 12 traditions, and Earl again suggested in 49 that Bill maybe do them into a short form, which Bill did, and they were accepted in 1950, of course, at the convention. But these agencies' business, it really, what came out of the conflict that was going on about those solicitations was the tradition of self-support. That had been a little quibbling during the rest of the 40s, because it hadn't been nailed down absolutely finally. So with the solution and the ending of this conflict about the solicitation, the final form in the short form of the traditions on the self-support tradition came to be accepted and came to be written. It took 4 years to get all this done. There was a lot of conflict around the country, whether we should have be affiliated or what we should do, and of course it's all in the traditions. Also, there was the importance of sponsorship, neglecting the importance of sponsorship. Many times this is happening even now. But that had been happening right along. The idea of sponsorship didn't take too much in New York until about the middle 40s. Anonymity breaking. Oh, wow. That was the big thing. And I don't have to tell you about some of those experiences. Lillian Roth going around. And so many. Oh, God, love us. Individuals professionalizing their membership. Members refusing to accept or to relate the meaning of anonymity to personal ambition. That was a very important thing. Management of clubs, gambling, boy and girl shenanigans in the clubs happened all over. The big thing about the clubs was they began to be called AA clubs very early. And that was wrong, because AA doesn't own property. It shouldn't have the name on it, so they had to take the name of members. When they held meetings in the club, they usually paid their rental or whatever. But that took a long time to get that. Bill wrote a lot of grapevine articles on that, as you know. And problems with wives. Oh, my goodness. That was a problem. What to do about wives being interfering with meetings and going on. We got notices all over the country about that. I remember one letter written by the AAs down south somewhere, and they complained because they had 2 rooms, one for the wives and one for the meetings and one for the AA's meeting, and on one side was the kitchen. Now, the kitchen was on one side, the AAs met in the middle, the wives met on the outside. So what they were complaining about was that the wives were going through their room to get to the kitchen. And we had to do something to tell those wives. I thought, why just not change rooms? It would be so simple just to change rooms. And maybe that's what they were told, I don't know. But things like that went on all the time. Now, there was other things, too tough membership rules and regulations. Many groups had rules you had to obey. Local members, as I say, local founders were from the newspaper articles and things like that were going on. So there was a lot. Now, what was happening was, just to end I just wanted to give you a background of what was happening while Bill was going around trying to get his ideas across, principally a good structure, a good framework to to bring things together, which was not, as I'm trying to indicate by all these things that were happening, was not the action, not what was happening. He wanted to get a good framework. In other words, a general service conference started. Nobody wanted to hear about that. They didn't think that was in the cards. They didn't think that was useful. Also, he had 6 things he wanted to do. That was one. The second one was to bring a linkage together so that there would be some good action worth coming from a linkage between the trustees. The trustees thought of themselves as simply custodial. They didn't want to get involved in the office or anything else. So that the office then was by itself, as I say, going through a metamorphosis of its own, while Bill was out traveling around trying to get the other ideas across. Also, there was a linkage in the 12 traditions. Nobody wanted to listen to their traditions at all. And you won't believe all of this. The grapevine. I'm trying to point out how individual members were and in their desires and what they wanted to do. They wanted to do their own thing. That was part of that era of everybody doing their own thing. Members were moving all over the country, carrying the message. There were, just let me give you the last one. Then the sixth thing of Bill's, I'm skipping all over the place, I know. A writing program. He wanted to get a good writing program started, which we did do in '54. That is to say, not all that Bill wanted. We got a lot of it started and doing. And so there was a period of here we were in one area without any cohesion, no responsibility. Now, what happened was that at the end of the 40s, they decided when AA was growing rapidly now during the latter part of the 40s overseas and in Mexico, South America, Australia, little beginnings were starting all over the world. And Bill had made a final trip to, or not a final one, but he made a trip he and Lois to Europe and saw the tremendous activity was going on over there, and he saw that they needed the same kind of structure that we were getting here, or hopefully we're going to get here at that point. By 48, 49, the efforts were going forward to make some help overseeing process in the office. It was called a General Service Committee. It became very useful, very helpful, out of which grew the idea of a general manager. And that first one was Hank Remy. A great, very stern, very useful, very needed person in those days. The second one was also out of this General Service Committee, was Herb Morse. And Herb was the same. Very, very, they were like teachers, like my dad. Stern, no nonsense. People liked it. People wanted this, needed it. AAs, needed it. And so there was at last some cohesion. And then, of course, we got the General Service Conference starting in 1951. And in 1959, the World Service Meeting started of overseas groups all over the world. Also, ESM, European Service Meeting started. I don't know whether that takes place every 2 years or not. But the World Service Meeting is every 2 years. Also, there's an Ibero-American service meeting, meaning that the Spanish members from Central America and South America. So that there is a tie-in. There's a good relationship and a good coherence and going on forward in all countries. And so that was what was happening. So what time is it? I want to talk about Bill and Lois. And I'm sorry, but boy, if you don't nail me down, I'll go on forever here. Okay, a few more minutes. I just want to tell you, I started doing Bill's work in 50, and then in 54, I started going up to Bedford Hills on Friday afternoon. Bill would pick me up in the station. He always addressed very casually, very country-ish at home in that time, and he would. Then we'd go home, and Bill'd say, okay, Nell, let's sit down and do some of the old chestnuts, meaning the piano. I could play a little bit, not as good as Lois could. Lois is a marvelous piano player, and she and Bill had marvelous sessions with the violin and the cello. Bill was marvelous on the cello. He could have had a career. With the cello. Great. And his favorite, we all listened to QXR. We're all classical music devotees anyway. But his favorite was Pablo Casals. And so we would, he would violin or cello would get started and would do some of the old, as he called them, chestnuts, the old In the Gloaming, those old things. And when I was up, it would be Seeing Nellie Home, and stuff like that. And then Lois would be in the kitchen making the dinner, and I would begin to smell the meat and those wonderful roasts coming. So then we would sit down and have our dinner, and then listen to the radio or talk or whatever. Now, and Saturday morning, that was the work day. And Bill would be dictating, which he liked to do. That's why I got up, because he liked to dictate at home. He didn't like to come down to the office and do all that dictating. And I kept track of all the, also up at the studio, of the records of the copies of the letters and any whatever else needed filing up there. And then after we had our did our duties that way, then we would all go for walks, the long walk. In those early days, I mean, since I started go up, there weren't half the people around that neighborhood that there are now. Really, it was just so that Bill and Lois very early on established long walks across property that became somebody else's property, and we found ourselves walking under a new house, under the kitchen and whatnot, and people that waved to us from the windows, and the neighborhood got to know Bill. When Bill got then ill later on, of the emphysema coming, he'd have to, his walking was very loose. That is to say, not strident. It was very soft and weak. And he'd have to sit down every few yards on a tree stump. And people saw that. And they were very alarmed and very worried about what was happening to him. But he kept up his walking because it was one way, especially in the 40s, that he was able to get rid or control his depressions just by walking, one step after the other. And he shared so much of what what was happening to him, how he controlled things, how he took care of these things. That was one of the big things. Bill just didn't talk about alcoholism all the time to people. He talked about depressions. I've heard people come up to him and say, "Thank you for saving my life twice." And we shared a big room in the office up until he died. And the various places that we had our office located. And he kept going, starting in 1966 with a little hand pump. Coming up, I saw a girl on the bus using a little pump, and I thought, I hope it isn't meaning she's going to have emphysema. I stopped smoking in 1969 because I couldn't, no way was I going to die of emphysema. No way. And Bill stopped also, but of course it was too late for him. And so I've stopped now for 21 years. And I'm grateful that I was able to do that. But Bill was able to share so much of his life with so many people. People say, well, Bill never did any 12-step work. Nonsense. People came up, neighbors, people drove from distances. They flew up to visit Bill and Lois on weekends. And Bill shared so much. I mean, he did a big share of 12-step work, not only in alcoholism, but in so many other. I mean, his philosophy was wrapped around what was happening in AA. What AA meant, what the steps meant, what the traditions meant. And he did a lot, as Lois did. And from the beginning, when they were going around the country talking, Lois was talking to family groups. We're talking to families, they would call them, that were starting. They called them auxiliary. They called them associate groups. They called them non-alcoholic groups. And so many had started by 50 when Bill made a final tour around the country and found out the flourishing of these family groups all over. It was, and we at the office had registered them because there was no other place for them to have some kind of a central point. And then Bill was excited and worried when he saw all this happening. Who was going to do this business? Who was going to take care of them? I mean, a focal point for them. And so, naturally, who did he think of first? Lois, of course. And Lois is a homebody. She's home. I mean, that is her career, was being home, taking care of the lawns, the work, the around the. See, they had about 8.5 acres for many years. Still do. There's still about 8.5 acres up there. And so Lois is my favorite side of Lois is going around, especially in the spring, spraying the trees with this big hat and the little veil hanging all the way down it, and being on her knees, taking care, trimming the trees. She brought down on that property. She brought down all the pine trees, the fir trees, and the birch trees, the white birch trees from Vermont. She brought them all down and planted them all around. Today, they're enormously high. I'm so surprised because since Lois died, I haven't been up there all that much, you know. And so when I go up, especially now that they're in full leaf, and I see these enormous trees stretched way up. Westchester County has a hell of a lot of big trees. And a lot of them are in the Wilson yards. Oh, it's amazing. And so Lois was a homebody. She made a lot of her little dresses. What am I talking about? Her dresses and the curtains, the sofa, the covers for the chairs and the sofas, all on an enormous. I don't know if you've been up there. Many of you been up there? This teensy-weensy little machine. And what she did on that is just completely amazing. But she loved it. That was Lois. She loved it. She's a marvelous photographer. She was a perfect photographer. She could have had a career. Pardon me. And she was a writer. She was a poet. She was an artist. She did marvelous drawings. And if you've seen some of them in the funny little sketches in her book, Lois Remembers, if you read that, which if you haven't, you should read. Very interesting, very interesting. And she was she was an organizer. To this day, I mean, I'm fascinated with what she did. She was also, as she said, she observed. She didn't see, she just observed. And I learned to do that. Today, I walk around Stuyvesant Town. I walk around wherever I am, and I observe. I see the forms. I look in the sky. I look all over, and I say, Lois, look at that. Look at that. I talk to her every day. And I point out, I know what she would have seen. We'd have seen. In the springtime, we made tours around the property. We examined in the spring the emerging little buds and the leaves and the flowers. And she had names. There was a magnificent tree. If you've been up to Stepping Stones, you know, in the back in the yard. She called it the monument. Always that. And we would walk around and do that twice a year. In the fall, we'd examine and see what was happening and all the colors that were out and whatnot. She was just complete. She made books of all the trips they took. Typed them all out, all the what was happening, description of the things they did, and developed, of course, her marvelous pictures upstairs. I mean, she has a huge volume of individual volumes of all the trips they took. There's so much to see at Stepping Stone, so much to see up there. And also in the studio, Bill's studio. And then, of course, Lois prepared for the end. She prepared for her last days by building a house that would have the caretaker. And up there today, there's two marvelous people, Paul L. and Eileen, both members. They live in the new house. The archives are over there in the new house. Everything is going along very, very nicely up there. But there was a uniqueness of contributions from both of these people, not only to AA and Al-Anon, but to, as time is going on, it's going to be to other associations, individuals, even more so, I think. As you know, Bill was called by Life magazine one of the most important 100 people of the century. And I think if we learn to adhere, stick to the traditions, stick to what AA is about, and not get involved and letting it get washed away. Remember the Washingtonians. Remember the Washingtonians. And we'll be fine, and we'll be getting along well if we remember what AA, the essential part of it, really is. And don't get... I was just reading about a new book called I'm Dysfunctional, You're Dysfunctional. It's out. Oh! M.G. Lord, that writer for Newsday, I think want to write her a letter. She wrote this article and said that, no more charismatic leaders and don't have any meaning. And, I mean, she bashed AA, particularly, pointed it out. This is happening a lot. And what we have to do is remain pure in our what happened in the past and what's happening today. And then we'll be okay. But not get involved, not make, let other people say what they want to say, but let's stick to the traditions, right? So anyway, okay, that's enough for today. And bless you for your loving presence and being here. I appreciate it.